I hope you can't hear a background noise from where I am.
It's fine, sir. We can't hear.
Oh, okay, good. No, because the television is on in the other room, so I just put one thing. I hope you can't hear a background noise.
Yes, Bhavana, please go ahead.
Am I audible, Manish?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Namaskar and good morning to all joining us from various parts of India for a very special session, the International Symposium on Modi Sarkar at 7, The Road Ahead. I am Songaria-Dabhade, President of the Indian Futures. I take this opportunity to welcome you all today on behalf of the Indian Futures. I cannot but begin by hoping you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Let me at the outset introduce the Indian Futures very briefly. We are a New Delhi-based independent think tank that started out in January 2016 with the sole aim to create a global platform to plainly and dispassionately discuss in the truest ancient Bharatiya tradition of a samvad, a dialogue, the ideas of New India. We at the Indian Futures seek to go beyond the headlines of the day and have an honest, deep conversation amongst the thinking community in India and abroad. We are extremely proud to have recently hosted some of India's finest minds from the world of government, politics, academia, diplomacy, and culture. Shri Suresh Prabhuji, former cabinet minister, Shri Devendra Fadnavis, former CM of Maharashtra, Shri V. Muralidhar, MOS of External Affairs, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, President of ICCR, BJP General Secretaries, Shri B.L. Santoshi, Shri Muralidhar Rao ji, Ms. Saroj Pandey, and Shri Ramadhavji, and Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, Chairman of NSAB, Ambassador Nirupama Menon Rao, and Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, recently retired Foreign Secretaries of India, Professor C. Rajamohan, Dr. Makarand Paranjape, Director IIAS Shimla, and our mentor in many ways, who always joins us today, and Yamini Iyer, CPR President, are just a few I have named here, other than top brains from different parts of the world. I would like to draw your attention to our very recently held international workshop on Quad in the Indo-Pacific, wherein top strategic minds from Australia, India, Japan, and the US addresses the Indian futures. Before I hand over to Dr. Manish to introduce other very esteemed panelists and the session, I would like to request you to follow us on all social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Insta, and YouTube, and feel free to share today's event with hashtag TIF Modi Sarkar. We would welcome that for sure. Kindly put yourself in mute mode to avoid any distraction in the program. Thanks again to one and all who have joined us here and on YouTube, where we are already live streaming the event. Over to you, Manish, now.
Thank you, Bhavana. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and namaskar, and a good morning to all. We are extremely fortunate to be here today with an assemblage of very stellar panel of distinguished speakers. Each one of them, and I'll come to each one of them, is known globally for their intellectual power, for their credibility, and for their originality. We begin with Shri P. Muralidhar Rao. Muralidhar Rao ji is the senior BJP leader, was till very recently, the general secretary of his party, and is now in charge of a very important state of Madhya Pradesh and also in charge of training. In fact, he is the BJP's brain trust, and many see him rightly as a young face nationally of the party, and especially the party's face in South India. Thank you so much, Muralidhar for really, holding our hand in many ways since many years now, and always been so supportive to our ventures, to our intellectual endeavors. It's really an honor to have you with us today morning. And let me remind you all that, in fact, all the introductions I am doing for all of you, each one of them is so well known, but I'm being very graphic because of the time constraints. So thank you, Amrita Rauji. We also have with us Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who is the Vice Chairman of the NITI Aayog with Cabinet Minister rank. He's, in fact, one of India's very top globally renowned economist and economic administrator, if I can also call that, and has been an author of a very successful, very super hit blockbuster book called Modi and His Challenges, published by Bloomsburg in 2016. And in fact, I vividly remember hosting Dr. Rajiv Kumar in JNU for that very fantastic discussion on his book. So thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, for really joining us today morning, knowing your very tight schedule. We're also extremely fortunate to have with us Ambassador Kamal Sibal. Uh, Sibal Saab, retired as a Foreign Secretary of India, was India's ambassador to France and Russia, Turkey and Egypt. Very important assignments for any diplomat, for any Indian diplomat. Uh, Again, a very prolific columnist in national and international media. And his Twitter, I follow him on Twitter regularly, and he's very concise, very precise, very candid, and I think that has endeared him so much to the intellectual class here in India and abroad. We also are extremely delighted to have with us Professor Makarand Paranjape, who is the director of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and my senior colleague in JNU as a professor in English literature. He is seen rightly as a very original, a brilliant Indic thinker. Many deeply admire, and for me, in fact, I have known him for almost 2 decades now, and he has been extremely supporting, very encouraging, always mentoring and pushing me to really go big. And I think, I really am at a loss of words to explain, to really show that immense sense of gratitude which I can feel for what he has meant for me over all these years. So thank you, sir. Truly an honor to have you with us today. We're also delighted to have with us Miss Sheela Bhatt. Sheela ji is a consulting editor of Dainik Bhaskar online, and again a very sharp, independent mind. Her columns are, which I'm sure all of you read almost on a daily basis, are extremely witty, very original, and very unbiased. So thank you, Sheila ji, for really readily agreeing to be with us today. We are here to talk about the Modi Sarkar at 7, the road ahead. And it can't be more timely in many ways, but I can immediately think of, or I could think of only two big ways. The immediate one, obviously, is from going from the headlines, we can immediately gauge that the government is really having a rethink on its positions in party, and the government's cabinet reshuffle seems to be very likely. So the government itself is pressing the reset button after 7 years. Also, I think just sitting a bit back and thinking big, it's really time to really understand and sense that India is at a tipping point of sorts now. There is obviously, we all could see a serious impact of COVID in very diverse domains: economy, society, but of course politics. And in fact, last few days, weeks, we have seen very candid, very constructive op-eds, opinion pieces, TV interviews on the need of course correction in both style and substance of governance. I think that is what we need to keep in mind. And despite the much needed hitting of the reset button, which is actually required, one can actually look back at all these 7 years of the Modi government, of the Modi Sarkar, and I could think of three A's which really define the Modi regime, the Modi Sarkar. And these are: first is ambition, number two, audacity, and number three, and very importantly, assertion. And all these three are of a new India. And again, one can immediately think of examples: Obama coming on the Republic Day parade, the triple talaq legislation, abrogation of Article 370, the CA legislation. Uh, and I think we all need to understand how, in fact, India has changed in all these 7 years. And I'll end here with by quoting Swapan Das Gupta. In fact, he wrote this column in the HT Hindustan Times on May 24th, and I quote him that PM Modi, quote, embraced by Indians who saw him as the agent of real change, a change that would unsettle a self serving consensus centered in privilege, entitlement, cronyism, inefficiency, and low national self esteem. Unquote. I think this line beautifully captures what Modi Sarkar has meant for all these years. But as I said, we are here together and today to just not talk about the past, but also, very importantly, what lies ahead. With this, I'll stop here and invite Muralidhar ji to begin his address. So, over to you, Muralidhar ji.
Hello, is it audible?
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Namaste. Namaste, Manish, for organizing this program and the eminent guests who are part of this today's panel of speakers and participating in today's discussion, and all other friends. I'm very happy and feel honored to participate in today's program. 7 years of Modi ji's governance, and on this issue, few important differentiating things I would like to place before this gathering. Friends, India, for the first time, we have a prime minister who is ideologically and even on the basis of background and upbringing, from the beginning till date, he has come from a kind of ideological background which is away from what we used to have. A non-Congress prime minister, completely in vision and in substance, in style and in functioning, and in values and commitments. In every aspect, a non-Congress prime minister with full majority. Before this, we had Atal Bihari Vajpayee also from the same background, but he did not have the full majority of the party or whatever he was belonging to. So he was depending on, again, the coalition parties definitely were part of the Congress ideological background. Many parties who were part of the Atalji's coalition were sharing the ideological background of the Congress establishment. So if you say today, this is a very important difference we have from 2014. So this I would like to make a very important thing. So Modi ji's governance, in every aspect after coming to power, sector by sector, or area by area, or policy after policy, if you take, from the beginning, he has always stood for a paradigm shift. Nehruvian paradigm, and shift from the Nehruvian paradigm is complete. In this aspect, he was never apologetic. In this aspect, he was never a kind of that, it was a basic vision and commitment. Everything he said, I am away from, my government is away from the Nehruvian politics and Nehruvian vision. This is a very important. It does not mean that on the nationalism or on national interest, there are no common points or no common grounds or no convergence, but definitely the vision and the perspective and the worldview are different. So this is a very important thing. Now, in third important aspect, I would like to place scale and speed. Speed of Modi ji's government and the scale of the Modi ji's government, if you say in any aspect, for example, education. 2014, we had 157 medical colleges. Now we added, we added medical colleges, and for that, if we were having 50,000 medical seats within the 7 years, we added 30,000 medical seats. So what I want to say, the scale and speed. We had 6 aims in 2014. Today we have added 15 aims. So we have to understand the infrastructure in education, infrastructure in other health aspect, or infrastructure in the social security kind of things, and physical infrastructure, whether it is roads or railways or airports in other aspects. The speed and scale, if you take, this is an important dimensional change this government has given. And in the public discourse, it has stated openly that these are possible things. So easily in popular sense, the slogan is there, Modi ji hai to mumkin hai, Modi hai to mumkin hai. If Modi ji is there, it is possible. This has become so popular. So scale and speed, this is a very important thing. Now coming to another dimension, I would like to say the social security aspect. In this government, if you say social security aspect, we know in the entire world, if there is a kind of mass of population which has been there in this country for the last so many decades without proper social security. Now, through different schemes, whether it is Ayushman Bharat or some insurance security schemes or otherwise through different schemes, this government has tried and attempted to take care of this aspect. And in this pandemic also, the social security aspect is adequately addressed, whatever within the possible resources which we have. So the social security aspect in coming days, this government is going to take care of that. So this is a change, scale and speed. Now coming to even housing sector, Modi ji has clearly said that housing sector is also very important and there should not be any person without roof. And after 75 years of independence, country having the people without roof is not appreciable, and it cannot be accepted. So in terms of urban infrastructure, in terms of metro infrastructure, and even if you say physical roads infrastructure, the kind of speed with which there is no comparison between the earlier Congress government and the present Modi ji's government. The highways are roads and other kinds of roads. So, almost doubled. So this kind of speed with which it has added the infrastructure. So in terms of welfare and in terms of infrastructure, there is a clear, departure from the earlier status quoist approaches. Now coming to the defense and security aspect also, keeping the China's emerging challenges in view and keeping the Pakistan attitude, Indian government under Modi ji's leadership is trying to catch up. There is a gap between China and India, definitely. And that gap, how to, in the coming days, decades, or coming years, how it can be matched and how it can be compensated. On that also, Indian government on the defense, acquiring the defense capabilities and all other aspects in Modi ji's government has done remarkably well. So the preparation on this front can be debated. Now coming to the governance aspect, the most important thing in Asian countries and developing countries and in African countries, the problem is always corruption was the main problem. And Congress government during Congress government, the entire population used to take it. It is an accepted thing. And India and corruption are synonymous. And you cannot have a non-corrupt regime and non-corrupt politics and governance on this front. Definitely, compared to earlier 10 years of UPA rule, there is no discussion or public debate on any kind of issues related to investment or anything on the matters of corruption. So Modi ji's government has liberated the government and the governance from the shackles of corruption or the kind of the grip of the corruption. So this is a very important relief for the Indian people. In the last 7 years, if you see, in the context of central government, there is no major issue involving any kind of bribing or anything. So corruption-free governance. And in this aspect, ease of doing business are reforms and bringing the transparency into the governance, bringing the transparency into the trade aspects, all these things, definitely the whole world is appreciating the Modi ji's governance. So this is the important thing, transparency and the corruption and the reformist approach when it comes to the systems and the practices. Definitely it is a positive development. Now, another important point on the international relations. Of course, there are other people who are well versed with those things. They will be speaking. But I would like to make a kind of, observation that this government has always stated it is having it stands for nationalism and nationalist approach. Many people talk about BJP as a right wing. I don't agree this right wing definition, and I don't agree with the left wing definition. What is left wing and what is the right wing? These normal, traditional or conventional definitions are no longer relevant today. When it comes to social security, when it comes to welfare schemes, when it comes to empowerment of poor, if government goes in that direction, it is called as left. When it comes to religion, when it comes to culture, when it comes to national interest, it is called as right in the international context. But it is, I don't see it is applicable here. BJP stands for the nation first approach and national interest and the nationalist view. Whether it is Kashmir, whether it is Tamil Nadu issues related to Tamilians in Sri Lanka or anywhere, it is a nation first approach, and on certain issues, our stand is non-negotiable. So that Modi ji has clearly articulated. Now coming to the internal politics, I would like to say appeasement of minorities. It was not just ideology, it was an electoral practice and electoral strategy. It is not just ideological concern. It is the earlier governments, and particularly Congress and the Congress-minded parties, they always, in the name of secularism and in the name of nationalism and in the name of accommodative politics, they always pampered and appeased the minorities and tried to convert the minorities into the captive vote banks. India, during Modi ji's regime, has completely liberated its electoral performance and the governance from these things. Whether it is Article 370 or Rama Janmabhoomi aspect or Tribal Talaq or all other aspects, if you see, it is a completely pure nationalism and completely Indian version of secularism, which is part of the Indian constitution, are completely established by Modi ji's governance. And there is an allegation outside that Modi ji discriminates the minorities, but it is not correct. When it comes to welfare programs, when it comes to policies, it has always gone with that कि सबके साथ और सबका विकास और सबका विश्वास, ये जो है, if you take Ujjwala Yojana or if you take any pension schemes and all other things. Now coming to again, I would like to add one more thing before closing my remarks. If you take, transparency and as I said, corruption free and maximum governance. In that context, definitely the reforms, whether it is Janadhan Yojana or Aadhaar or all other things, mobile and all these things, if you say, definitely the capacity of the government to reach out to the poor and to reach out to the people and the benefit transferring and all aspects, the governance efficacy has increased. And Janadhan account is a resounding success and a remarkable achievement, and you don't have any parallel in the world. Without the Prime Minister's backing and without Prime Minister's vision, this could not have been achieved. So this is the greatest achievement in the whole world. This kind of number getting into financial inclusion or getting access to banks has never happened. Now, definitely coming to the point of federal governance, irrespective of which party is ruling which state, the Finance Commission reports and the devolution of funds and the GST, all these things, they stand for, a futuristic India and preparing itself to face 21st century challenges. So in this aspect, definitely Modi's government, I have highlighted few important aspects. There are a number of other things, but definitely Modi's government is a departure from the old status quoist regimes and departure from the ideological shibboleths. So a new line of a new pathway is created in this country, which is away from the old Congress ideological worldview. Thank you.
Thank you, Muralidhar. I think you brilliantly brought out the political element of how the BJP sees the last 7 years of Modi Sarkar, and I think there would be an agreement of sorts on two very important points you highlighted. Obviously, that the current leadership, Prime Minister Modi's leadership, is really in sharp ideological contrast to the erstwhile Congress party, and again with a full majority this time even earlier. I think that's a very important point you are making, and also not many would disagree that which you highlighted again was the scale and the speed in terms of the governance style and substance. I think that's a very important point you have raised here. Again, you talked about the diverse fields, infrastructure development, defense security. Very importantly, I think we all should understand was the question of corruption. I think we all have lived through really the UPA two. I mean, corruption after corruption scams. I think that is such a welcome relief, not just nationally but also the international image. I think has really gone much higher because of that. And very brilliant and very important point, which I think many would agree that ultimately it is nationalism or the nationalist approach or the nation first approach that seems to define, that is really the defining feature of Modi's 7 years. So thank you, Muralidhar, for those extremely insightful remarks, and I think we have really been enriched by your remarks. Thank you, sir. With this, I now request Dr. Rajiv Kumar to address us. So, what do you, Dr. Kumar?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Manish, for giving me this opportunity to address this audience and be a part of this very eminent panel. This is and your webinar is well timed about the way forward, and I think that's the one to now focus on, because Mr. Muralidhar Rao has, I think, quite comprehensively covered the past 7 years and the achievements. But let me, I will focus principally on the economic aspects of our country, of the economy, because I'm sure between Ambassador Kanwal, Sibal, and the others, the other aspects will be covered more than adequately. Let me start off by saying that we have to admit at the moment, and I think that should be, at least I would, being in NITI Aayog, I have to say that we have to admit that we are in a tough situation at the moment. And we have, we are facing one of our most severe economic situations, which is not of our making, which is not of our doing. In fact, I would say that I'm very surprised at where we are and where we find ourselves today because of this pandemic, which has affected globally everybody. And this is a once in a century pandemic, unprecedented, unexpected, completely the ferocity of the second wave having surprised us as much as, as anything else. So I say this simply because we unless we recognize this, we won't be able to, we won't be able to take the steps that are required. Now, we have taken a very large number of steps in these 7 years. I mean, I don't think, I was in the government between 91 to 95, the other period where huge amounts of structural reforms were taken. And I was then in the Ministry of Finance as an economic advisor. So I know all the details of the reforms that were taken between 91 to 96. And knowing that, I would say, and I would in fact challenge anybody to contest this, that these 7 years have seen far more structural reforms and far more difficult ones than were undertaken in the 91 to 96 period. And I think what we require to do, perhaps the BJP could do that, is to compare the reforms taken between 91 and 96 and between 2014 to 2021, because I think it will make very interesting reading. I had done an article on that earlier in response to what once Mr. Chidambaram had written. And I want to emphasize that this government has been one of the most reformist government in economic terms. I don't, that we have seen probably since independence. And Mr. Rao referred to all of these, but let me go to the hardcore GDP statistics, which is in the first quarter of 1920, which is January to March 2020, when the economy registered a growth rate of 4.2%. That is when most of us economists had said that we have now bottomed out on the GDP cycle, and that from that onwards, from that first quarter onwards, we will get a higher growth rate quarter upon quarter upon quarter. And that was the expectation. But then came the pandemic in March, and struck us right in the beginning, as it were, of the upswing of our business cycle, of our economic cycle. And at that point of time, and I think many people try to debate this, but I think it's beyond debate, that given where we were, given our state of preparedness or weaknesses in it, given our health infrastructure, given our awareness, given the people's need for behavioral change, a national lockdown was a necessity, was a must. And that's what was done at that point of time. My colleague, Dr. V.K. Paul, who heads some of the empowered groups now, has put out some very solid statistics and data to show that in the absence of such a lockdown, we would have lost far more lives than what we have gotten away with, with that. So I think that's what we need to remember. And I think this is where I think over the last 2 years, over the last these unprecedented 500 days, we have been successful in managing the balance between lives and livelihood. So far, we have done that, I think, more adequately than most countries in the world. And that's one of the big reasons for that is the kind of work that was done in the first 5 years of this government to empower and improve, to empower those at the bottom of the pyramid. The spirit of Antyodaya, which is reflected in all sorts of programs, starting with Swachh Bharat or Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana or Ayushman Bharat, the Pradhan Mantri, the sort of, on Poshan Abhiyan, on PMJY, on PM Kisan Nidhi, all that focus, that Sabhagya, that focus on the bottom of the pyramid enabled us to weather the storms that the pandemic caused in the first year without undue loss of lives and without any life being lost, as it were, to penury and other factors other than the pandemic. The government quickly ramped up the allocation for Manrega by 60,000 crore, so that all those returning migrants, etc., were also taken care of. So I think what we have to remember is that this government has laid the foundations of a very strong economic growth, of a growth which is both strong, sustainable, and equitable by the huge number of reforms that it has done in the last 7 years. Now, these reforms, on the one hand, were, as I said, focused on improving the welfare, improving the livelihood and living standards of those at the bottom of the pyramid, but on the other hand, have also been focused to instill the confidence in the investors, both domestic and foreign, by improving the business environment in the country. And apart from the fact that we've jumped 70 ranks in the World Bank, indices of the ease of doing business, there are some very important things that have been done in these last years. For example, the biometric basis for direct benefit transfer based on Aadhaar, of which 450 schemes today are being, have been transferred to the direct benefit transfer, which has saved the government more than 1 lakh of crores by now, in leakages and in corruption, etc. The faceless assessment of income tax, is SSEs, which is now the second version of that is now being rolled out. The strengthening of the insolvency and bankruptcy code and its working as we go forward, which has made exit much easier than what it was, and which has given the creditors their due, so that the risk that they face with those to whom they lend are removed. The fact about the GST having rolled out, people don't recognize the importance of this huge reform. We've now, for the first time in this country, got a unified economy across, without trucks and buses having to wait at the state borders and every state having its own fiscal regime. The devolution of not 31 but 42% of tax revenues to the states, which affords them greater fiscal sovereignty and greater fiscal space. I can go on and on and on, but what I wanted to say is that the government has taken steps to improve the investment climate, so that I'm convinced that once we are out of this shadow, this dark shadow of the pandemic, as we are hoping to be out now, and the second wave has subsided, the recovery, the economic recovery that we will have, based on these fundamental changes, which will be much sharper, far more sustained, much more equitable. The benefits of that growth will flow down to those who are at the who are at the end of the queue, and it will be sustainable. And about sustainability, I wanted to talk about the fact that India has not only given very ambitious nationally determined commitments in the Paris conference and the COPA, but it has led the internationally with the International Solar Alliance. We have now declared our targets for renewable energy. We have now taken many steps to improve the water situation in the country. I was with the Minister for Jal Shakti, Shri Shekhawat, just the other day. The latest survey of groundwater resources, for the first time in 70 years, has shown a slight reversal and stability of the levels of groundwater in the majority of the blocks in the country. Now, that's a huge achievement. NITI Aayog had come out with a report which showed that we are near a water emergency. and we are successfully trying to reverse that with the steps that we've taken. In NITI Aayog, we have taken many steps to improve natural farming and प्राकृतिक खेती. And प्राकृतिक खेती का सबसे बड़ा जो लाभ है वो ये है कि ये हमारी खेती को एग्रोकेमिकल से फ्री करती है और हमारी जो ज़मीन है, हमारी जो पृथ्वी है, हमारी जो वसुधा है, उसको फिर से जो है उसकी एक नई जिंदगी देती है. उसमें ऑर्गेनिक कार्बन कंटेंट उस सॉइल में बढ़ाने की बात करती है, जिससे कि सस्टेनेबिलिटी की बात और ज़्यादा बढ़ेगी. So for the strength of recovery, for the equity or benefits of that recovery and the sustainability of that recovery, I think economic growth going forward, we have laid the foundations, and now we will, I hope, get the benefits. Based on that, I want to say that I am aware of all the agencies who have reduced the estimates for India's economic growth in 21-22. I am surprised at those, and I think, including the RBI, who's brought it down by a full percentage point, more than a percentage point. And I dare say that when this economic recovery takes hold, beginning in July, which is my expectation, but of course this expectation is based on the assumption that the pandemic would have subsided and we won't be hit by another virulent third wave, and that even if we are hit, we will be far better prepared as we are with all the health infrastructure work that has been done in the past 6 months. The effect of that will be much weaker than what it has been in the first and the second week. Given that, I still expect India to achieve a double-digit economic growth in 21-22. And I dare say that come October and November, the agencies which have revised their estimates downwards for GDP growth in 21-22 will, I think, will be looking at revising their growth estimates upwards again towards a double-digit growth. And once we achieve that in 21-22, I am quite sure that in the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, India will be on a higher trajectory path, and a higher trajectory path which I think should be 8% and more going forward. Now, I want to end my talk by simply saying, by overemphasizing the fact that there is no other priority in this country at this time, and I'm using the word advisedly. There is no other priority in this country at this time than to ensure a rapid, sustained, and equitable GDP growth. We will not, as today Ambassador Gautam Bambawale's brilliant article in the Times of India points out, we will never be able to face up to our northern neighbor, or we'll never be able to build a strong coalition of our South Asian partners until we catch up and until we close this gap that has emerged between China and us over the last 4 decades. We were at the same level in 1990, and in these last 3 decades, now their GDP is $14 trillion and ours is about $3 trillion. This hard economic fact has to be recognized, and I think all of us, and I appeal to all the panelists here, to recognize this and to be with me in saying that, that the first 3 priorities in India today are economic growth, and economic growth. And I think that is what we should be focused upon. And this is what the Modi government has done, and this is what the Modi government will continue to do. And therefore, I think a new paradigm of strong, sustainable, and equitable growth awaits us, and which we will achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, for a very comprehensive overview of the economic challenge, of the economic successes of the last 7 years. Obviously, you started out rightly pointing out how we are, or indeed the entire world is in a very tough economic situation because of the COVID pandemic. But very importantly, one should really have a very honest assessment, which you rightly flagged for all of us, that ultimately this is the most reformist government in years. And again, obviously, the yardstick obviously is comparing the 91 to 96 period, and from 2014 to 2021. I think that is a very sensible point, which all of us would agree. Again, the focus should be on strong, sustainable, equitable economic growth. That has been the focus of the Modi government. We can immediately see those changes: ease of doing business, GST rollout, DBT. But very importantly, where you're sitting, that the planning commission was converted into NITI Aayog. I think that is also a very forward-looking reformist approach to issues of planning and all-round development of India. I think that's a very important point, which we all need to understand. And also, as you pointed out, ultimately it is going to be our economic position, our economic power, that is going to decide India's place in the Committee of Nations. I think that is a very important hard economic fact, which we all need to understand and grapple with. And that is really the key to achieving the great power status, which we all talk about. And that is where I think, thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, again for this wonderful address. And that is where I think Ambassador Kanwal Sibal would really guide us all, that how India is fared, and how maybe also we can also sketch out for us how the COVID pandemic, in terms of affecting the economy negatively, also affects our international ambitions in some ways. So over to you, Ambassador Sibal.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a very enriching discussion so far. Just as Dr. Rajiv Kumar talked about the road ahead, I'd like to focus on that. To begin with, I would say that the road ahead is going to be difficult and uncertain. In the foreign policy domain, there are at the moment certain developments, certain trends, which would put us under some pressure in terms of aligning ourselves with them, and to see how best we can expand our national outreach, international outreach, and protect our interests. One, of course, is the US-China relationship, and in which direction it is headed. Now, if US is determined to follow a confrontational course, and China would be unwilling to step back and continue to be defiant, as we've seen in Alaska, then there would be more and more pressure on everyone, not only India, but Europe and others, to take positions. And this will mean that India will have then to decide how far it wants to align itself, not in military terms, align itself with the United States, and become a part of the larger game plan to curb China's ambitions, which then means that in the area of Indo-Pacific, the Quad, as is already evident, that we are becoming more and more vocal, more and more committed to these organizations. If you read carefully the statements by the External Affairs Minister, this is the direction in which we are headed. But then we have to see whether we can maintain our strategic autonomy, because this government, quite rightly, would want to, in consonance with our own national ambitions to be a leading power, cannot compromise our strategic autonomy, which does not mean that we can't forge stronger relationship with countries which can help us to tide over the external challenges that we are facing. But nevertheless, we don't want to become a prisoner of their decisions and policies. And we've seen, in the case of United States especially, that they can take decisions which a strong country like the United States can pay the price for, but which, if we got embroiled on those decisions, which have already costed us quite a bit in terms of our relationship with Iran and Russia, can be problematic for us. The trends in US-Russia ties will also have meaning for us. Similarly, how strong the Biden administration is able to forge once again transatlantic solidarity, because there is resistance in Europe because they don't know whether after 4 years another government may come in the United States which may have a somewhat different view. Similarly, the EU-China relationship would be important because the EU at the moment is a bit of a weak point in terms of handling China, especially because of Germany, which has a huge relationship with China. In fact, you might be surprised to learn that today the EU-China trade ties are bigger than the EU-United States trade ties. But before I elaborate on some of these points further, I think the immediate challenge that we have, which will determine the future course of our economy and our international position, at least in the short run, is this COVID situation. We are not out of the woods. Vaccination is extremely important. The developed countries have gone ahead and vaccinated large percentages of their population. And India, while we have done rather well, if you just look at relative numbers in terms of people we have vaccinated, but given the size of our population, there's a lot more that needs to be done to cope with the third wave or whatever we may have in the offing because of this virus that keeps mutating, which means that we have to ramp up our vaccine production. And this cannot be done autonomously. It is absolutely necessary to forge a very close relationship with the United States because it is now that the policymakers have discovered how much grip the United States has on global vaccine supply chains. In fact, they dominate them without what they produce. About 280 items are needed for vaccine production. And it is believed that maybe 240 out of these 280 have been patented by US companies. So that was the purpose of the External Affairs Minister's visit to the United States, to persuade the US government to put its weight behind the private sector in the United States to ramp up their production of intermediates and ingredients and all the other things that are needed for vaccine production, which then Indian companies can contract for on a commercial basis. But if they don't ramp up production, then we have an issue going ahead. You know about the India-South Africa proposal in the WTO to suspend IPRs on vaccine production for 3 years to begin with. But this proposal is partially supported by the United States because they want to limit it only to vaccine production. And EU is reticent because they believe that the best way going forward is compulsory licensing and not suspension of IPR. So there is a bit of a battle ahead. We are hoping that text-based negotiations will be completed by July. Personally, I am doubtful, but I'm not aware of the ground situation. Our Prime Minister had made a similar appeal during the G7 meeting in terms of making sure that in terms of facing the health pandemic, the world is treated as one. Now, Dr. Rajiv Kumar has outlined his thinking about our growth prospects with the caveat that it shouldn't be derailed by the pandemic situation. So economic recovery is going to be absolutely the key issue going forward. And an aspect of this would be for India to attract some supply chains which might move out of China, and how we can best do it and how we meet the expectations of those companies which might want to have India as an alternative to investing more in China and becoming more dependent on China. In this context, I think we would need to do a little more effort in explaining as we are doing, but we have to do more convincing about what this Atmanirbharta means, because there is this propaganda that it is a bit of a reversal to the past, although the Prime Minister himself and others have explained that this is simply not the case, but we have to be more proactive in removing doubts. In this connection, defense self-reliance is extremely important. I don't think we can meet the China challenge as we go ahead without the capacity to produce our own defense equipment. I remember when I was ambassador to France and we had our defense minister visiting Paris, and we met the French president at that time. And he made a simple point that no country can have an independent foreign policy unless it is self-reliant in defense. And this was said in the year 2000 or so. So you can imagine that 21 years have elapsed, and although some recent decisions have been taken to make sure that some of the key items are produced in India, yet we remain quite dependent on imports from abroad. Now, with regard to China, it's very clear that it will not be status quo ante, not only on the border, but in terms of the overall relationship. That basic, I won't say trust, but the basic, how should I say, arrangement that we had, not arrangement, the basic policy that we were pursuing, that we can keep the border issue aside and then see if we can develop ties in other areas, hoping that at some stage, this will make it easier to settle the border issue. This has been the policy all these years, right from 1988 onwards, if you like. But this is no longer our policy. We made it clear. The External Affairs Minister has maybe a dozen or more times said that the relationship is dependent on stability on the border. You can't have a tension on the border and then say that we can carry on business as usual. This means that we have to make some very hard choices, especially with regard to the United States, because the United States will be key in developing our capacities to stand up to China, whether on land or at sea, in terms of technology inputs and certain vital platforms, which we can't produce locally, but which would be necessary to be able to cope with the China challenge. And now, what price the United States will extract from us for this, it will be a challenge to our diplomacy, but there is very little option, frankly. Europe is partially an option, France in particular, but not a wide enough option to meet our needs. China will step up pressure in our neighborhood. Already in Sri Lanka, they seem to be well entrenched, as we can see. The latest decisions taken by the Sri Lankan government on port development is an indication of that. In Nepal, they're strongly entrenched, though at the moment Nepal is in a bit of a fluid situation. With Bangladesh, they are there. They're the biggest defense partner of Bangladesh, but we've been able to establish very good ties with the Sheikh Hasina government. And that has been a notable success of our foreign policy, as well as in Maldives. But Myanmar has become an issue. Myanmar has become an issue. Oh. Sorry, I think my telephone came and got interrupted. So Myanmar has become an issue. This was the fulcrum of our Act East policy. And now that state is in a bit of a turmoil. It has come under sanctions again. So how long after we can pick up the pieces in Myanmar would be difficult. It would be a challenge ahead for us. In terms of Japan and our relationship with Japan after the departure of Abe, the early indications are good. Suga is the new prime minister is following Abe's policies and is quite vocal in terms of his position on China. So that's a good thing. In terms of our relationship with Europe, we have taken some major steps by going ahead and agreeing to negotiate a free trade agreement, which is important in terms of Europe paying more attention to us in view of the rising China challenge. And this is an opportunity we have to draw Europe and India closer together in economic and defense and other areas. But one issue which is going to pose serious challenges to us, and we don't have a ready answer yet, is Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan, the situation has become very precarious from India's point of view. The Americans are withdrawing. They are opening the doors to the Taliban to eventually take over power. And this they are doing while Taliban actually is committing horrific terror attacks against Afghans themselves, against the civilian population, against school-going girls. So they're handing over Afghanistan back to the terrorists whom they had displaced some years ago, and they are paving the way for them to take over. This will mean that Pakistan will have the capacity to play more mischief against our interests in Afghanistan, and this time backed by China. It's quite likely that a kind of a civil war type of a situation may emerge, and this will present us with some difficult choices. Turkey has become a bit of an issue. Secular Turkey was less of a problem for us in its relationship with Pakistan or otherwise its ambitions in Central Asia. But an Islamist Turkey is a big problem for us. And we have to study very closely the undercurrents of relationships between Pakistan and Turkey. Finally, a couple of points. In this connection on Afghanistan, related point is that we've seen a vast change in the attitude of Saudi Arabia, UAE, countries which had earlier recognized the Taliban government. Now they are going on a very different track. They've become much more moderate in terms of their foreign policy. Look at the way the UAE has now opened up relations with Israel and Oman and even in North Africa, Morocco. So we have to work very hard to this time have a community of interest with countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE to make sure that Taliban and the Pakistan combined is dealt with collectively by us, and it is possible given the weight Saudi Arabia and UAE have in Pakistan, and they will have an interest in this because they want to counter Turkey. Finally, Russia. We have to watch very carefully the relationship between Russia and Pakistan, Russia and Afghanistan, Russia and Taliban, because while in the past we've had virtually no geopolitical differences with us and Russia in our region, but this time some crises are developing, and we have to make sure that Russia remains firmly on our side, or at least as much as possible, and also to make sure that that we have a foot into the Russia-China relationship, because the more if Russia drifts a little bit, it will strengthen. We'll have less capacity to actually make sure that on vital issues of national interest, Russia remains on our side, or in the best of cases, neutral. The fact that America has come back into the JCPOA means that some openings are possible in terms of Iran and our energy relationship with it. And I'll end by saying that the climate change issue is going to be a very big one. There'll be constant pressure on us. This whole issue of sustainable development is a kind of a ploy, kind of a, how should I say, tool that the West has to make sure that they control the pace of development of countries like India. Because each thing is tested against what is sustainable, while they themselves have lifestyles and which which are not sustainable, because if you look at the kind of resources they consume, whether it's physical resources or energy resources, they're far, far higher than developing countries like India. So the whole thing about the green economy and everything else is an issue that we have to face going forward, and it's intimately related to our economic development. In this, I must say the Prime Minister has taken a very bold lead. In the past, we were on the defensive. We were seen as a problem. Today, we are seen as a leader with the International Solar Alliance, Disaster Resilience, Infrastructure Coalition, and the targets that we've set ourselves for renewable energy, as Dr. Rajiv Kumar mentioned. This has given us a strong argument that we are with everybody else in terms of tackling climate change. But there has to be climate justice, and there has to be availability of technology and finance. The battle will be fought in November in Glasgow when the COP26 meets. So I'll end with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Sibal, I think, for that wonderful address, where you really gave a very comprehensive, view of the contemporary emerging geopolitical landscape. Obviously, the most important defining feature of today's geopolitical times, as you rightly pointed out, is the US-China competition. So, how is that going to play out in the next months and years is very important. Obviously, talking about the immediate challenge of the COVID pandemic, how do we ensure that the supply chains are moved to India? And obviously, a very important point which you flagged out for all of us was how important it was that self-reliance and defense are so important to India's successes internationally. I think that's a very important point, and obviously, time for hard choices. I think that is so much important. That how India looks at US, how India deals with Russia, which seems to be getting closer and closer to China and also maybe Pakistan. And I think the fundamental shift of the last 7 years, and that is where you ended with, was how India, rather than being at the margins, was now seeing itself as a leading power. And that is what I think the leading power concept was articulated brilliantly in the initial years of the Modi years itself, of the Modi government itself. So thank you, Ambassador Sibal, for those very insightful remarks. With this, I now invite Professor Makarand Paranjape, and it's been a long, long wait. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Manish ji. Thank you so much, and congratulations to you and Bhavana ji for organizing this panel and for all the work you're doing in India Futures. It's really, should I say, not only commendable but inspiring. I wish you all the best. You have many more horizons to conquer. With those words, I'm also deeply grateful to the previous speakers who've laid out the stage, as it were, for this very important discussion. I don't think, however, I got a sense of, Modi Sarkar at 7 and the way ahead, which was, I think, a part of the panel title from what I understood. I think the previous speakers, especially Muralidhar Raoji, has already laid out the paradigm shift and how many of us perceive Prime Minister Modi as a change agent, a tremendous change agent. I'll come to that in a moment, but I just wanted to apologize briefly for switching off my video, switching off my audio and so forth, because the electricity has been going off and on for the last 1 hour. Now, I want to use this as an example of how India works, which is to say that almost nothing in India works the way it should or is expected to work. Now, after 4 years of independence, how is it that none of our systems is working at optimal, let alone peak efficiency? Muralidhar Rao mentioned about corruption. I completely agree. But you come into Delhi and at 2 a.m. there'll be a cop waiting to fine you 2,000 if your mask is just below your nose in a closed car with the windows up. And it's only when you tell him who you are, he'll ask you, where are you going, sir? And if you tell him I'm going to JNU, he said, "Acha sir, jaiye. Hum teachers ko fine nahi lagate." I said, "Bakaida chalan kata ke mujhse paise le lijiye." They are like vultures waiting to catch you, and they have targets. So what I'm trying to say is lofty ideas of India and the lived reality of India are different, very different. Thinking about being a great power, having a $3 trillion economy, wanting to go further, all this is wonderful. But we have to also look at the reality, the ground reality, if we really want to improve and go into it very deeply. Why are we the way we are? And I'm going to come to that later. But just on the same track, I want to make one more little point before I really begin my presentation, which is what Dr. Rajiv Kumar said. Wonderful. You know, we are trying to grow, the reforms are in place, and we have a long way to go from here. And wonderful things are happening. When I came to Shimla, you know, it took maybe 5 hours from Chandigarh. Now it takes 3.5 hours, though the roads are not yet fully done. Things are happening. But just look at what happens if you want to start a new business in India. I've got an article in front of me which says state and central regulations and compliances amount to 69,233 compliances and 6,618 regulatory filings. I mean, I've got a whole article, and you can compare other countries, how many days it takes to set up a business in Singapore or in Sweden, you know, or even in, you know, Brazil, how many days it takes in India, etc. So I'm saying that our lived reality, if we want to be even a moderate power, not only a great power, there's much we have to do and be honest about it. Now, let me come back to the initial impetus for this panel, which is that many of us who have been following the Prime Minister from his days in Gujarat really believed that we needed a change agent like this to completely overhaul what India had become, you know, not only the so-called Hindu rate of growth, the elephant, etc., all those metaphors notwithstanding, there was something rotten in the state of India, to use a phrase from Hamlet. And who would set it right? Who would clean the you know, Augean stable, so to speak? And we needed a change agent. And I think I can say so. I don't speak in my official capacity. I speak as an academic, as an individual, as a citizen of this country. I can say that, you know, there's been no leader in India who has been such a huge change agent, an inspirer of the masses since Mahatma Gandhi as Shri Narendra Modi. This is my personal view, as I said, and I've maintained it. I've written about it, so it's nothing new. Now the real question is, what's going wrong, or what are the things that need attention? And here we have to come to a very important aspect, which is, what is a leader? See, a leader is not just a person or even a personality. A leader is an energy. And that energy courses through the veins of the body politic, as it were. It can inspire citizens to do amazing things, sometimes things which are later proved to be not so you know, useful, you know, like demonetization, for example. But yet, people will support such a leader when they say sahi niyat, you know, and sabka saath, sabka vikas, and so forth. But the point I'm trying to make is there's a huge gap between what we profess and what we are. We wanted maximum governance and minimum government, but I see there's maximum government. There's government everywhere. And when this government, which is omnipotent and omnipresent and supposedly omniscient, but is not omniscient, actually ends up making miscalculations or making misjudgments for whatever reason, the costs are so immense. So I want to go back to what Manish said in the beginning. He started with, I believe, if I remember right, 3 A's: ambition, audacity, and assertion. I want to respond with 3 P's, you know, pragmatism, performance, and politics. So the point I want to make is winning an election is not the same as governing a country. These are completely different things. And when it comes to governance, you have to be pragmatic. What I mean by that is that a great leader can centralize power, can make things happen in a completely unprecedented way, bilateral entry, by creating special engines to convey his ideas to people, connecting directly with the people, Man Ki Baat, 100 schemes, so many schemes you can't count. Every week there's some new scheme, you lose track, and you don't know how to actually access the scheme. You know, the barrage of numbers that comes out is mind-boggling. And who's going to go through all those numbers to see which ones work and which ones don't work? So what I'm trying to say is the UP election is looming ahead. There's a certain sense of scare about whether you can carry this whole agenda forward, because it's very important. You need a certain amount of time to take it forward. And this is where I want to come to my final point, which is what I call China envy. You know, the CCP is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary. And we've all known what China did from 1990 to 2020. And we also think we can do something similar if we can take the whole country along. You have common cause, you include everybody. But unfortunately, if you look at governance, most of our energies, the energies of not only of our leaders in politics, but our leaders in public institutions, our energies are only to stay in power, you know, because if you're a politician, it's 24/7, you know, there's hardly any consensus building in this country. The polity is so divided today. Every day you look at the news. Where is the bipartisanship which is required in a great country to take common agendas forward? So if you're looking at a mid-course reflection, then I want to flag a few things. So if you have China envy, let it be about efficiency and competence. You know, let it not be about centralizing power, using laws, colonial laws such as sedition indiscriminately. When leaders are criticized, it's not sedition. It's only when disaffection is created against an elected government or the state of India. You're throwing people into jails for criticizing, a particular leader. And I'm not saying one party is doing it. We all know all parties are doing it. If you do a cartoon against a particular regional leader, you may end up in jail. Your home may be raided. And you want to say we are the largest democracy? You can't simply be an electoral democracy, you know, and you can't say that democracy is a part of our ethos. Of course it is. And that's why we have to protect it and cherish it and take good advice from all sides. And it seems to me that we can't create a situation where one party or one ideology wants to completely destroy the other and not let it exist. I think democracy means coexistence and competition between good ideas. It is not trying to snuff out the other. And I'm also saying this, you know, one side is saying Congress Mukt Bharat, the other side is saying Modi Mukt Bharat. They are attacking one individual or two individuals, hitting below the belt, and every day you see a kind of public tamasha. So this is a public culture. So what I'm trying to say is that if you want to take the country along, if you want to retain power, you have to be pragmatic. And being pragmatic means a great leader can centralize power, a great leader can also distribute power. So I say China envy is bad for India because we cannot centralize power indefinitely like the CCP can with a lifetime leader, lifelong leader. We need second-rung leaders. We need second-rung campaigners. We need to nurture talent at all levels of society. but we have created a talent destroying engine when it comes to government and government related institutions. And when it comes to private players, what do? We overregulate them or we underregulate them. You can start an international school of management in Munirka and give out fake degrees, and it'll take a while before you're found out. And if you're trying to run a very good private university, then you'll see the amount of trouble you get into. So, to conclude, what I'm trying to say is that we need a more decentralized approach to governance. More power may devolve to ministries and ministers, and not everything should be left pending to one channel of authority, of power. And leaders have to be seen as being more approachable, more compassionate, more capable of listening to advice from all sides, more accessible, yes, even to the media, not just to the public. And we have to create broad-based coalitions. And I agree that some wonderful things have been done. I'm a great supporter of the change, if not abrogation, of 370. I'm a great supporter of what's happening with the Quad and G7+4 initiatives. We have to create new alliances with the free world. And I'm also a supporter of CAA. There are some issues with it, but Ram Mandir I'm a supporter of. Now, these are wonderful things for which you need a majority, you need a will. But I think good governance exceeds these things. We mentioned earlier, Muralidhar mentioned earlier that many more engineering, rather medical seats, many more institutions. But where is the ecosystem that encourages the best people and talent? And you want to be a Vishwa Guru, but our education, higher education, and tertiary education, undergrad education, primary education, these are in a state of crisis. Our graduates literally don't know ABC, and in science, BScs don't know the basic things that are required in maths, physics, chemistry. Now, these are the realities, and you want to be a great power. So what I'm trying to say is the way is long, and the job is so hard to do. And I want to end by saying, where are we failing if we are failing? I think we're failing because we are too interested in narrative building. We are not interested in fixing real problems. What do I mean by that? By that I mean that an average day in India, you encounter 25 different kinds of problems and 25 different degrees of dysfunctional institutions or dysfunctional systems, varying degrees of them. Now you might ask, why aren't we able to fix it? And the simple answer is we are not able to fix it because we have created a huge wall between those who can fix these problems and the problems themselves. In other words, we have a society which is characterized by competence deficit, and yet we have a governance system which is characterized by competence phobia. So God help you if you're remotely competent in this system, there'll be 20 people trying to destroy you. And even Dr. Manish Dabhade has to create his own forum called India Futures, unaided, unsupported, within quotes. He's putting his own money. So entrepreneurship, cultural, intellectual, civilizational is all right. But the systems are not encouraging the best people to come forward and contribute. We all love India and we are committed to trying to make this a great country. And we are much more than a great country. We are a great civilization. And this civilization has some values. And I'm afraid that no matter how much lip service we pay to these values, whether these values are truth in our act or ahimsa, whatever these values are, in our say asatya, tyag, vidya, these are great civilizational values. We pay lip service to them, but we do not practice them. And that is why I want to end by talking about a word which no one mentions, which is consciousness. We need the consciousness to change our society and country. And it is only by changing consciousness that public morality as well as private morality can be changed, that we can move out of a hypocritical, self centered, and selfish way of living to an actually more compassionate, cooperative, as well as national service oriented way of living. We all say nation first, but when we live and what we do is me first, then my family, then my community, then my caste, then my tribe, then my region, and most of our debates, most of our politics, and most of our policies, unfortunately, are still, as I would put it, held hostage by these interests. So unless we are much more honest, much more self-critical, and we are much more able to help each other and support each other when we want to change our consciousness, I'm afraid this will carry on for another 20 years. Of course, there's a momentum, and the wave and the twig is an analogy I want to end with. Once Samarth Guru Ramdas, who's supposed to be the guru of Shivaji, was standing next to him. Some other people say it was Tukaram, but these are apocryphal stories. And after his coronation, a wonderful fort was being built, Raigad. And Shivaji had the thought in his mind, look what I have accomplished against all odds. And Ramdas picked up his thought and he just said, Maharaj, do you see that lizard in the crack underneath the fort wall? And immediately Shivaji understood. The lizard thinks it's carrying the fort wall. So what I'm saying is we are all like little twigs. There's a huge wave which is pushing an Indian renaissance. And we are very small players, very small agents in this big wave. But when we think that we are doing things, I suppose we are going in a path that will really not accomplish the goals that we have stated for ourselves. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manish ji. And I want to once again say that these are remarks in my personal capacity as an academic and as a public intellectual. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Paranjape. I think, yeah, this was again, as always, a very, very stimulating address. And obviously, you began by pointing out how Prime Minister Modi was seen as a change agent, and obviously, most importantly, it was not about superficial changes, but really, as you pointed out, to overall systems of governance and governance in politics, economics, very diverse domains, including culture, even cultural and renaissance, which you were talking about. And again, at some level, we seem to be losing focus. And again, why, as you pointed out, why pragmatism should be the driving force. How China, what we should be trying to emulate is about competence, about efficiency, rather than the centralization of power. I think that was a very important concern which you flagged, which many are now pointing out. And again, the last point, obviously, how important it was to have this consciousness. I think once you have that power of consciousness, it will lead each one of us to be moving towards changing things, maybe in our individual capacity, but also as a collective. So I think those were very brilliant. Remarks. With this, and in fact, one of the points which you raised was about the narrative building, and we really have the best person anyone can imagine, Sheela ji, who is really a doyen of sorts in the media, to really guide us, to really address about the whole media scenario in the last 7 years. Over to you, Sheela ji. Please unmute yourself.
Please unmute. Unmute, please.
Please unmute, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sheela ji, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Sheela ji.
So, hello everybody, and thank you so much, Manish and everybody. I really enjoyed Makarand Paranjape's talk. He has touched upon a lot of points which I really support, and I also agree to it. Um, Manish, can you hear me? No, Manish.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Huh. So, talking about Modi's 7 years and media, let us first understand the basic point is the basic premise is that Modi certainly has a problem with the media, and large section of media, not all, if not all, has a problem with Modi, and this has been a very major characteristic of the 7 years of Modi in Delhi. That goes without saying, but the reason behind this Modi's approach to media and media's issues with Modi is because Modi came from a regional, from Gujarat with a kind of a hard disk because he had experienced a certain way of politics in Gujarat and the media of Gujarat. And I think not many people are knowing that Gujarati media when Modi was chief minister was quite free and was very critical of Modi also. And lots have been printed in Gujarati media uh, against Modi, critical of Modi, and still Modi survived. So Modi has kind of a, I would say, a kind of a manual that how to deal with media and what to understand of media. And I think people should, those who are interested in Modi's understanding of media and the problems with media, should understand how Gujarati media, a large, very powerful Gujarati media outlet, were critical of Modi, and still Modi was winning successive elections. So Modi have understood that the issues with media. Also, second point, please understand that you will find rarely from 47 to now any prime minister who has invested so much in media and who has understood media so minutely. I mean, Modi knows who is important in media, the owners and the desk editors, and not necessarily always the reporters. What goes finally into the media. So the entire angles and focus of media, he has quite a good control and understanding of it. So that second thing. Third thing, I would like to say that uh, Modi's media problem is, you keep aside, that is there, and we have lot of problem with that. That why should a cartoonist be harassed, or why should the critical story should the writer of the critical story should be trolled, and that keep that one aside. But there is one thing about Modi which we have not been understood, which is not taken into account and not focused upon, is that Modi has has done a weaving, which is a quite a brilliant weaving and a difficult one and a very complex one, where by plan and by nature of his leadership has really reduced the power of media over the years. In the sense, I would not say use power. Power is in some sense a dirty word, but I would say influence of media, because power is with Modi and the people who are in the power and in the establishment. We are not that part of that, but I would say influence of the traditional media. Those, so like all the members of Press Club of India or Indian Women's Press Corps or Editors Guild of India, I think the influence of this particularly Delhi-based media has reduced a lot, and this has happened when Modi has woven a kind of a leadership for himself is such where he is talking directly to the people. I Please listen carefully that For years, for 40 years, we are on the ground. We go to the villages, towns, districts, to many people, even to the bureaucrats, even district magistrates. And when we talk, so we will discuss some issue. Then average people, women, and even youth, and everybody, local leaders, local cadres of different party, even opposition party, non-BJP party, they disconnect with us, who are physically sitting with them, and they just start talking to Modi. Do you understand this point? We are the medium. We are the media. We carry the people views to larger audience. But here are people. So between Modi and media, the way we have grown in India has grown. This people aspect has changed very big way, more than Modi or more than in media, and that is also a problem. Not a problem, but a characteristic in our this metrics, media metrics. And secondly, the biggest problem, Modi is a prime minister and he has his own focus and vision. But I would say lot of problem would have been solved if Modi should have made certain kind of communication with the media which reports the ministry. I would emphasize very much that all the ministries and PMO should have been more transparent and more accessible and available. If I am doing a story which is very critical of Modi or of any ministry, so what? Let us talk. I'm asking you some question and you give me the answer, and then the final story would come out. I think this fundamental aspect is missing in this, and it's not about all about that we are after Modi. No. So I think there is some Modi. I had written in May 2014 one article, the first article after Modi became prime minister. The title was check-in luggage of Modi. Even at that time, I had written the same thing. It is happening now also. That if Modi would have made this ministry such a behind this wall, I think lot could have been saved for media freedom, and this international embracement of having much less. We are at the lower side of the press freedom. So I think two big issues are there. Again, I'll put it. There is one is a people and Modi's relationship, which is also reflecting on media. And now on the media side, see, Modi is making two big mistakes. As I said, there are a lot can be said about this issue. One is this excessive transparency of this ministry and its working, and the communication between the beat people, reporters. If that can be solved, lot can be solved. Lot can this toxicity and this negativity can come down. On the other side, I would say that media also needs to reflect, and I think it's a very big thing. So, see, in Bombay, Air India headquarter has one hoarding. So when they were changing the hoarding every month, they would put up one curtain, and it would say we are changing. I understand that 7 years of Modi are fantastic in some sense, that Indian media is relationship with the people in power and its relationship with viewers. Both are revolutionizing. We are there is a we are right now changing. We What will come out in 2024 or 2029, I don't know, but we are changing, and we are changing very fast. How? I will tell you that I ask at least in a month at least 10 to 15 family, are they reading newspapers, and they say no. Are you subscribing? Many of them who are subscribing are not subscribing. And I can tell you that I'm reading from 79 till I would say COVID time editorials. That was my fancy, my habit. But now confessing, even person like me who's considered to be, I mean, well read of a contemporary news. I'm a news junkie, but really, even I have changed, and I can imagine that how people are reading something different. Hello, Delhi people are becoming irrelevant somewhat, and the journalists who are outside Delhi are more important. MEA's certain aspect, what they think of Afghanistan or what they think of G7, if somebody in Patna is putting up in YouTube, is read more than the editorial pages of the great newspapers in Delhi. So that is influencing more even on G7, please. So I'm saying that the Delhi based, I can say I'm in Delhi since 91. Before that, I was in Mumbai. I can definitely say the influence of the Delhi people have come down, and it has nothing to do with Modi. But the very fascinating aspect of our life today is that the social media. Hello, can you hear me? No, Manish. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Ah,
Sheila ji, we can
okay.
hear you.
Sorry. So I feel that social media, which has given us a fantastic freedom to everybody in India, everybody who is subscribing to social media, has really affected journalism in a very different way. So those who are labeling certain people Godi media, or one set of people are feeling that Modi and its government is putting pressure and hurting freedoms. Yes, there are very big serious issues with the government which is less transparent, and that's why we feel our freedom is curtailed. We want more information. We are in the system of information and broadcasting that information. We have a problem, but at the same time, please understand, those who are having issues with Modi is a one set of people, largely, and there are another set of people who have come up, and there are any number of people who are criticizing Modi and really getting in big number of audience, and they are really a big influencer. So like I would name Ajit Anjum is there. There's one Hindi journalist. It is my view. No, I have not asked him, but I don't think he will have a better influence if he's in Hindu Times of India or Indian Express. I think he's doing much better now. So, and he's doing every single. I have never seen him not criticizing Modi in any of his episodes. So, I'm saying that this labeling of Modi media is so irrelevant, because you keep labeling this certain set of people Modi media, but on the other side, something else has come up and is coming up. So, I think. Modi's 7 years are also 7 years of a big changes in the media and its importance and its shape, and there is value system and ethics. Lot, if somewhere we certainly feel there is some issue with our freedom, but there are another new ground somewhere where I can go rush, uh, get hold of that trick of the trade and enjoy my freedom. So I think we are changing. We are undergoing a big change. And even I'm very sure, even Modi and his government is also waiting to see where it will lead to. Will it Modi and his government, us, and even to the people? Just lastly, I want to say that we, that media is having problem with Modi, yes, but media should understand one thing, which I think we are making mistake, all of us, that there are issues like issue of unemployment, like issue of COVID mismanagement, like issue of we have a questions on vaccine policy, like we have a problem with majorly this communal divide in the country and BJP politics. But hello, it's not about Modi, it's about the issues. Why we are so obsessed with Modi, why Modi should, these are big issues, global issues, national issues, they are survival issues. This is one thing. Why every big editors and big critics of Modi are forgetting we have 134 crore people. Modi is just one of us. Okay, very powerful, can influence, but can't influence everybody. And these issues are big. So I would say that please don't put your camera and your fight against Modi. Keep the issue in center and then take on Modi or everybody in the power. So I think this strategy somewhere is going wrong. But on the balance, I would say that Modi immediately and urgently needs to make some correction, and there is very easy way for Modi to make correction. He has still 3 very good years to go, and I would say that these 5 acts, if he wants to really change, and and if he makes business, if he wants to really uh, uh, by next election 2024, if he really wants to convince media that how he means he values freedom, then I would say 6 7 this criminal defamation, section 499 and 500 Indian Penal Code, then contempt of court, the 71, then breach of privileges, which is also a big issue for us while writing Constitution has accorded the special rights to Parliament, and seditions, this section 121, 124A of Indian Penal Code. Modi should ensure, Modi government should ensure, the people in power in even states should ensure. Please do something about it. You cannot have a freedom of media under Indian skies when these kind of acts are really making our life miserable. So I would say Modi should attend this, should should take up this in the cabinet, in the parliament, and should identify this. That these are even Nehru times. Jawaharlal Nehru also had described section 124A in 1951 as highly objectionable and obnoxious. So please, Mr. Modi, in 2021, you what Jawaharlal Nehru did not do, please do it in a case of sedition case. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheela ji. I hope Modi ji sees this video, which is live streaming on YouTube also, and listens to some very sensible points and some very sensible arguments. As a democracy, I think we all should cherish, which in fact Professor Paranjape also talked about. You wonderfully laid out a very complex and a dramatically changing media scenario, and again, and I think you really explained very beautifully how the haters came from both sides, from both the media fraternity, but also how the Modi government was seeing it, shaped by their own experiences over all these years. But definitely, I think what you said makes immense sense that course correction is definitely needed now, and because it is a bit surprising that we all have the other speakers talking about and very creditable achievements by the Modi government over all these years. In fact, more openness, more transparency will in fact make the government job much easier to reach out to a larger set of people. So thank you very much again, and I wish we had more time to even take questions. I've been flooded with questions, but we have run out of time. So with this, I really want to thank each of the panelists, each of the distinguished speakers who have joined us today. May I now request Prafullit, who is a pillar of the Team Indian Futures, to make a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Prafullit. Please unmute yourself.
Uh, Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of Team The Indian Futures, I would like to thank our speakers, Sri Muralidhar Rawji, Senior BJP Leader, Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman NITI Aayog, Ambassador Kaman Savar, who was India's Foreign Secretary and a senior diplomat, Professor Makarand Paranjape, Director IIAS Shimla, Sheela Bhatt, Consulting Editor Dainik Bhaskar, for enlightening us with their knowledge and valuable insights on the topic of the day, that was Modi Sarkar at 7, the road ahead. I'm sure all the participants enjoyed it thoroughly. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants who joined us through Zoom and several others who joined us through YouTube. Do subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram pages so that you'll be regularly updated, and also share about the event on your social media. Thank you, thanks a lot. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Paranjape, for joining. Thank you, Sheela ji. Thank you, sir.